What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Mental Corner podcast, the show where I bring on guests from all different backgrounds to talk all the things mental health. I'm your host, Harry Potvin, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Gary Fahey. For almost 20 years, Gary led the team responsible for the security of the Australian Prime Minister. But in 2016, due to some previous issues and a gambling addiction, it felt like his whole life came crumbling down. Gary was so fun to talk to, and this episode really just shows the beauty of Zoom. There would be no other way that I would be able to sit down and have a chat like this with some dude from the other side of the planet. So I wanted to thank Gary again for coming on and having this discussion with me. Now, before we get into it, guys, you know the drill. If you're listening, please like, comment, share, subscribe, give 5 stars if you're on that podcast platform. Share with someone who might want to hear this episode. It's a really great one, and I can't wait for you to listen. Talk to y'all very soon. Go get some sun out today. It's a beautiful day out there. Peace. Gary, thank you so much for joining me today, man.
Pleasure, mate. Happy to be on with you.
So before we get too into anything, I wanted to get to know you a little bit better. So where does your whole journey start?
Yeah, well, obviously, I suppose if most of your listeners are North America, Canada, where you are, you can tell by my accent that I'm not from there. I'm a boy from Australia, down under, and if where it starts is, I suppose, I don't know, the story would go humble beginnings, but I grew up in a place called Mount Druitt, Western Sydney of New South Wales. It's a lower socio-economic area. It's a working class area. My parents very hard working. Dad worked 2 jobs for 20 years. Mum worked, the best part of 20 years as well. And they did that because they came from not a lot, and they wanted to make sure that their only boy or their only child had some opportunities that they didn't have. So I was very fortunate in that respect. And about the age of 10, we moved out, still in Western Sydney, but probably a little bit better socio-economic class. The next rung up the ladder. I probably consider myself a pretty normal Aussie bloke growing up, or Aussie male child. I played football. I played rugby league. Did a lot of sporting activities. I was okay at school. I was fortunate enough to be able to get through school without too many hiccups. As I got a bit older, I enjoyed a beer. I enjoyed doing things that Aussie blokes tend to do. I moved on from there, and I had a short time. Well, it was relatively short time as a physical education teacher, a PE teacher in our high school, secondary school system over here, and joined the police at 22. Joined the federal police, our Australian Federal Police, at 22. Similar to your, if there was a similarity, similar to the mounted police over there, and spent the next 18 years there. All 18 of them were fantastic, even though the last year and a half was a dark period of my life, and certainly some aspects of it that I regret and unfortunately will be remembered for. But I've really changed the way I look at the world, and all 18 and a half years of my time there were fantastic. I got to travel the world. I got to see some things that kids that grew up in Mount Druitt just never get to see. Spend some time with some pretty important, some pretty interesting people. As I said, it was a fantastic time. And the last year and a half, I faced a lot of my own dark demons. With depression was probably the major mental health issue, along with the gambling addiction, a pretty large gambling addiction that cost me almost $2 million. It did cost my career in the end, and my reputation, because of some silly decisions and actions that I took with my work credit card. And then the last, what would it be, 4 or so years, I've got myself a gym in Queensland. My background's in physical health, I suppose, health and fitness. Got a small gym in Queensland, but then really took on that deep, dark journey of how did I get here? And more importantly, as I started to find out, how the hell do I get out? And started to find that understanding of, not just the not just the gambling addiction, which was clearly what was the easiest to see in the mirror, right? I knew I had a big problem there, but actually to look deeper at the reasons why I was pushed towards that, and the ego behind why I couldn't or wouldn't get help leading up to the last 4 years. Did a lot of research on neuroscience, understanding habits and that sort of stuff, and really built a platform that helped me get out of where I was. And now these days I try and coach men through something similar.
Love it, man. Wow. What a story. Um, with that last year and a half that you were talking about, where you hit your lowest point, was that kind of like a did that downward spiral hit immediately, or was it like a slow burn?
No, look, it was a slow burn, and I say a year and a half. I was actually making some comments to some people earlier today that I again, most people will still address my gambling issue as being the issue. I no longer consider myself that I had a gambling problem, although I had a very deep problem with gambling. The drama for me was that over a 10 or 12-year period, I'd stopped gambling at least 4 times for a period of 6 months or longer. But because I only ever addressed, the way I call it is the issue I saw in the mirror. And I talk to people that come to the gym about this a lot. A lot of people that have health and fitness issues or weight issues will typically only address the issue they see in the mirror, which is their weight. And what that meant, excuse me, was that every time that I went periods of time without gambling, every single day almost was a battle. I was just trying to work on willpower. I was just trying to fight the urges and all that sort of stuff, because I never really addressed what was sending me there in the first place. I thought my issue was gambling, so I just kept fixing the gambling and kept wondering why I'd head back. So I actually started gambling on my own when I was 8 years old. There's nothing to that. I do say, I've been writing a lot, and I do say in my book that just because I started gambling at 8 wasn't the reason why I became an addicted gambler, because I had my first cigarette when I was 8 years old, but I don't smoke. Like a lot of kids in Australia, I probably had a sip of dad's beer when I was 5 or 6, and I'm not. In fact, I haven't had a drink for 3 months. I've not really ever had a problem. I've never had a problem with alcohol. My mum used to take me shopping when I was younger, but I don't have a shopping addiction. So I do understand that some of these things can create the atmosphere of addiction, but I certainly don't blame that. But so for 30 years, I'd been gambling, and probably that last 12, it got very serious and very severe. And I think the last year and a half, most of what I've learned is in hindsight, and looking back, I can really see the degeneration of it over the last year and a half, as in between the ages of 38 and 40, I suppose. But if I was being honest, probably every time I relapsed, I went through the same, or every time I stopped, I went through the same degeneration. It's just that ultimately this time, it came to a head because of some serious mistakes I made with that corporate credit card, and it was a wake up call that I wasn't able to get away from this time.
Hmm. Do you feel like that wake up call was almost a blessing in disguise, like looking back now?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm a really big fan of gratitude. I'm a big fan of it over the past 2 to 3 years, 3 or 4 years. I wasn't anything to do with gratitude before that. And one of the most vital things that I've found is to be able. What's the language situation on your show? Can I say shit?
Everything, yeah, go for it.
Okay, I'm not a big swearer, but I say that you have to find a way to be grateful for the shit in your life.
Mm.
And certainly at the time, I absolutely did not want it to come to a head the way that it did. It destroyed 18 years of a career that was, that had a number of highlight reels. And as I said, considering the highlights I've had, I will be remembered for the last week, probably not, but the period of that last year and a half. So I certainly didn't want it to end that way. And I think it's also important to understand that you can be grateful for a situation. It doesn't mean the situation was great. It doesn't mean it was good to go through. It doesn't mean you enjoyed it or wanted it to happen. But ultimately, I've determined that I'm grateful for that circumstance, or even the period where I'd lost all that money, or I'd been through that experience, because I'm grateful for it happening, because for a couple of reasons. One, it's highly likely, knowing the trend and the depth that I was getting to, that had that not happened, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today. So, as bad as it was certainly better than the alternative, in my view. Which could have ended in suicide. And secondly, the way I look at it now is it actually has allowed me to properly live out my purpose, to actually really assess, what it is that I want to be remembered for, who I want to be as a person, what I want to work towards. And certainly without the experiences that I've been through, I don't think I'd be as successful or even willing to do the work that I now do.
Hmm. Isn't it crazy that when you're in a moment like that, like a low point like that, you've got like such a tunnel vision about it that once you're out of it, you're like, oh my God,
Yeah.
it's wild. Like when I was starting to get out of my super depressive state, I remember looking back and going, holy shit. Like you just don't see it.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to see, and the reason for that, as I said, look, I'm not a neuroscientist, I don't have degrees in it, but I certainly studied a lot, researched a lot, read a lot, watched a lot. There's very what I learned, and what was very helpful for me, is that there's actually very good evidence as to why we do that. There's a good explanation, and me being a practical alpha male style of guy, I needed to hear that there was a reason behind it. I needed to know that there was facts behind it. I need to know that, it wasn't just some weird thing that was going on in my head. And, the things that I've learned is our brain is trying to be as efficient as possible. So it will try and search for information that gives it what's the word I'm looking for? It will search for information that proves the theory that it's got in its head. So it doesn't have to, come up with counter arguments and all that. So if I feel depressed or I feel down, I will actually start searching for more evidence that that's the right feeling to have. So when I'm in the middle of a depression, everything really gets you down. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be, and the next day, if you're in a good mood, those exact same things will make you feel good. You'll be able to find the good things in it. It's a practice that that you can build on. But certainly when you're in the middle of depression or in the middle of a depression, it's a power that seems to not be not be within your control.
Hmm. It's almost like when you're in a relationship that you low key want to get out of, and you're
Hmm.
just looking for things that are going to bother you, and then all of a sudden, all these little things are starting to piss you off.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people will talk a lot about the reticular activating system, and it all stems around that sort of stuff too. Things that are important to you will manifest inside your head, and if your example there, all those things that piss you off in the relationship 3 years in when you're trying to get out of it, all existed for the past 3 years. It's just that you had a different frame of mind about the relationship. So you either overlooked them, didn't notice they even existed, or focused on something else that was a lot more positive in your life. If your partner's a noisy eater, they've been a noisy eater ever since you've been with them. It's only now that you're looking for that way to get out that you're starting to notice it, and it's really starting to grind on you.
Yeah, and then the poor other person is like, "What? I thought this was okay."
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we tell ourselves it's okay. We tell ourselves that I can deal with these things, and they don't matter, and they probably don't matter. But when you want them to matter, they can certainly come up and bite you.
Yeah, 100%. So when you were let go from your position,
Yep.
what's going through your mind like initially when you first experienced that? What's going through your head when you kind of realize that these 18 years of highlights is over?
Well, it's interesting. I probably still at the time there was a little bit of ego at play that was still masking my issues from me, even though they were plain to see. And I say to people, I would tell people I had a gambling problem for a long time. That was true. I just didn't believe it. I just had this ego in front of that discussion that wouldn't allow me to actually believe that was a problem. So I say that the day I got the phone call, I mean, clearly when you know you've done something wrong and done something wrong over a period of time, at some stage, the anxiety grows that you're gonna, someone's going to be asking you questions about it. And so the day I got the phone calls from a deputy commissioner, so the second, the second highest in charge at the organisation. I worked for the commissioner. I ran the commissioner's office at the time. And the deputy commissioner calls and asks you to come in. It's not going to be a pleasant conversation. And I say to people that I had really only two thoughts in my head. One was, how the fuck did I get here? And the second was, how the fuck do I get out? I had no real worry about what was to come. I know conceptually I was going to struggle to keep my job. But at the time, I still probably ran through all of these scenarios that if I say this could work and I might be able to move through that, or I might be able to, stave this off or keep my job, or, make it look like something else or pay it back, or whatever the case may be. All of these crazy ideas that just were literally survival ideas that would come up. Look, I've probably always had a relatively healthy ego, and there wasn't a lot of times where I felt like that I would never be able to amount to anything again. I felt very embarrassed. I felt very embarrassed because all bar this area of my life, I feel like I've lived a life of integrity, and I think we all fall victim to our own stories. And my story in my own head always was the second that you lose your integrity, you have no ability to get it back. It's not something that you can regain. I no longer have that view, but certainly that was the story that I felt at the time. And so the embarrassment I felt was more about I could no longer be the person that I felt like I was, that I'd lost my identity. I'd been 20 years and 18 years in the police. I'd been a man of integrity. I'd done all these fantastic things. And in an instant, I lost my story. It didn't matter that it was my job. I wasn't that as concerned. I want to make this clear. I was concerned about losing my job, but on hindsight, the thing that caused me the greatest deal of trouble was losing my story, losing my identity, the person who I believed that I was. Probably that belief was what got me in trouble in the first place. I kept trying to live up to a belief or a story or an identity that wasn't truly who I was, and that that caused as much trouble as as it did success, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. That loss of self identity. That's a scary thing to go through, man.
Absolutely. And look, guys will do this. I won't say more than girls, but I focus a lot of my work on males. I focus a lot on successful males and alpha males, because that's the department that I come from, right? I don't want to pretend to know areas of the world that I've not lived or experienced. I do all my coaching through experience. I've learned a lot, but usually whatever I coach, I've been through. So I do coach people that are successful but struggling. The people that are living a story, an identity that their social conditioning has told them they should have: the great job, the great car, the great house, the great wife, the great family, all the holidays, the money, but still somehow they're struggling inside. Still somehow they're not happy. And they thought that the next promotion would get them there. They thought that the next car would get them there. And in reality, that's not the way the system works. And I found that out in probably the harshest of ways. So I like to, use that. But it's also true of people that end careers. There might be people that are 60, 65 that have been 40 years in a career and their identity is attached to a career. Happens a lot with sports people. I work with some sports people as well that, for 20 years or 10 years, you've been known as, the footballer, the hockey player, whatever the case may be. And all of a sudden you're the ex-hockey player. That causes some serious identity issues within people. The reality is your identity is not what you do, it's who you are. But but the conditioning is such that that's what the story becomes inside our heads. So it's a difficult process to go through. It's a difficult process to understand, and because a lot of the times it's all it all just appears to happen. It's not a conscious process that you go through. It's really a subconscious. You don't even know that's your identity. It's just you just somehow feel like shit, and you can't figure out why, because everything in life is telling you should be happy.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I was a swimmer. So when I retired, it was kind of like, cuz that was my whole life, and then when I retired I was like, what the fuck? What do I do now? Cuz it was like everything in my life revolved around swimming. And it's
Yeah.
like that for a lot of my friends who were athletes. A lot of my friends who were in like a job forever, or like anything really. They just, once they're out of it, they're like, I don't know what to do with myself.
Yeah, it's very very common, because you go to a party, and what's one of the first couple of questions that people ask you? Hi, what's your name? What do you do? And all of a sudden, that just becomes on repeat. This is what I do. This is what I do. All of a sudden, becomes this is who I am. And when you can't be that, when you can't be a swimmer anymore, then who am I? Now, this is one of these, these very deep questions that gets into the meaning of life and the meaning of the universe and all of this sort of stuff that people go, we don't have to worry about that sort of thing. But the who am I question is one of the deepest questions that people need to be asking, that they never do. They're just it's easier to assume the identity that we've been given. And we've been given it over years of swimming, perhaps. We've been given it over years of working at the factory. We've been given it over years of, for me, being in the police. I was Gary, the guy who ran the commissioner's office. I was Gary, the guy who ran the Prime Minister's protection team. I was Gary, the guy from the federal police. I wasn't, Gary, the man who does the things that he says he's going to do, that lives up to his own, his own morals, his own promises, and all that sort of stuff. Because that shit's hard to do, but just being who you're told you are is a lot easier.
Hmm. So when you were trying to adjust between the one Gary to the other, what kind of helped you get through that process? Like what kind of made it smoother sailing?
I don't know that any of it was smooth sailing. I think looking back on it, the great part about hindsight is I can now document what I did go through, and it was very disjointed. It was very up and down. There was a lot of trial and error. There was a truckload of pain. There was a lot of gritting your teeth. There was a lot of days where I felt that this was it. I just can't do it anymore. There was a lot of battles. There was a lot of successes as well. There was short moments of or moments that were successful. And the hard part is every time that you find a success and you then hit another hurdle, your brain automatically goes to, oh shit, what's the point? I'm just right back where I started. We know that we're never back where we started, because we've always, every journey we go on, we learn something new that we can take to the next way. But look, it wasn't a smooth journey at all. It wasn't probably even linear. I've been able to create a linear process out of it. But look, the one thing that really made it easier, or the time that it got a lot easier, was the day I sat down and became brutally honest about the depths of where I'd gotten to, the depths of the thoughts, the depths of what I was hiding from myself, the depths of the damage I'd done to me, the damage I'd done to other people, and then started to peel back the excuses and the ego that was stopping me previously from from at least identifying the problems. The day I truly became vulnerable with myself, things seemed to get a lot easier. When I was no longer masking anything from myself, it was a lot easier to move through some of the troubled times. I still had debts to pay. I still had people that were pissed off with me. I think at the time I was still going through a court case. So there was still a lot of trouble to come ahead. But the mere fact that I was no longer hiding or masking from my own troubles, all of those things seemed to be a lot easier to deal with.
Hmm. As men being vulnerable with ourselves, let alone our others, it's so scary. Just
Yeah,
yeah.
100%. I mean, I tell people, look, I still maintain that I never told a lie to anybody about anything apart from my gambling and money, right? It was always something to do with the gambling and money that was involved in that. So I'm still comfortable with that. But and I'm not suggesting that anybody should intentionally go around lying to people or anything like that. But lies to everybody else don't really matter. It's the lies that you tell yourself. And in reality, the only reason you do lie to everybody else is because you're lying to yourself, right? If you are open and vulnerable with yourself and you don't have anything to mask, and let me tell you, it's a tough as shit process to get to. Like this is not a just wake up one day and go, oh, you know what, because as I said, I openly admitted to a gambling problem that was true long before I actually believed it. Like that was some shit to actually go through to really come to that realization. And that your ego is isn't as infallible as you think it happens to be. That's a tough day at the office. Um, but the lies that you tell to yourself are the ones that are going to get you in the most trouble, because once you're past that point, you don't need to lie to anybody else, right? For me, I didn't need to escape into gambling to mask a feeling or a thought or an ego that I was trying to hide from myself. It doesn't get super easy straight away. You still got some old habits that you have to address, but ultimately, not lying to yourself is the first key point of getting through it. And look, we all do it. We all lie to ourselves. I still do. Right? I'm not going to pretend that I'm able to never lie to myself. And as simple as telling yourself you're going to work out at 1 o'clock and you don't work out until 3 o'clock, right? Or you don't work out at all that day. That's a lie that you told yourself, right? It can be as simple as that. And so we're never going to be, we're never going to be angels in terms of not saying some of those things to ourselves, but certainly some of those bigger ones that we really mask, that lead us to our drinking, that lead us to our drugs, that lead us to gambling, or porn addiction or shopping addiction, or whatever happens to be, laziness, even that keeps us in depression and all that, those sorts of things. Those are the lies that if people could work harder on getting to the bottom of those, a lot of people will be a lot better off.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. When you were going through when you were going through those lies and building your own structure again, were there any tools that worked best for you in terms of getting rid of those lies and becoming the person that you ultimately are today?
Yeah, look, I think one of the key things in that passage early on was I somehow found a way to stop finding reasons why things wouldn't work for me. I've always been into self development type of scenario, type of videos and podcasts and those types of things, and motivational quotes and where they come from. But often people that have issues will always find a reason why something won't work for you. So, I'd read things on gambling addiction and there'd be a reason why that wouldn't work for me, because, oh, that person doesn't work in the police and doesn't have the same stresses as me. So that won't work for me. So at the same time that I started to get brutally honest with myself, I'm not entirely sure whether it was conscious or not, but I definitely try and coach people into this now, that I actually started to look in every story I could find, or every story I could read or listen to or watch, areas that related to me. So I did realize that in terms of gambling, there's far less on gambling addiction than there is on alcohol and drugs. So trying to find my story and anything else out there was going to be even more difficult. But I then started to realize that there's plenty of stories of survival, of struggles, of overcoming barriers, of issues that maybe I could learn from. And I still remember the very first one that is clear in my mind is a Tony Robbins talking to a guy in the audience about saving his marriage. Now, at the time, my relationship was going through some troubled times, but the things I started to draw out of there were more personal, about my struggles with who I was as a person, nothing to do with the relationship. The guy certainly had nothing to do with my story. But I started to find some things in almost every story I was listening to, that related to me, and that I could say, you know what, I could try that. That could work for me. I can understand what that person is saying, because I can feel that in me. It's they're talking about drugs and mine's gambling, or they're talking about marriage and mine's depression, or they're talking about, something else. But I found some way to relate other people's success stories to myself, and then tried, an element of what that process was. I think that shift in mindset from this, from actively avoiding things, or actively suggesting that things won't work because there's no similarity, into actively trying to find, like, I would work hard on stories and try and find the similarities so that I could pull something from it. That really changed the way I started to approach everything in life. Actually, that there's something I can get from everything and from everybody.
Hmm. It's almost like going back to what you were talking about, where when you're in that, um, like when we were talking about, like when you're in that relationship you want to get out of, and you're looking at everything that's bothering you. It's
Mm-hmm.
like flipping that completely 180.
Yeah, 100%. And you got to remember too that, sometimes, we're all very much a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I have depression and a serious gambling addiction, I have a very good excuse why I don't have to try as hard as somebody else, right? I have a very good reason why I'm not as successful as I tell the world that I should be. I've got a very good excuse to lay in bed all day. So, if we are being honest about it, there's actually a part of you that doesn't want to change, right? It's it's going to be hard to change. That doesn't mean that people want to have depression, or want to be depressed, or want to have an addiction. But there is a part of that addiction and that depression that is serving something within you. For me, the gambling was serving a mask for me. The depression was providing me an excuse for it. And so, wanting to be depressed, um, whilst it doesn't make a lot of sense conceptually, there's a part of your subconscious that goes, you know what, this is your ticket out, right? You don't have to worry about anything. If you've got this illness, everybody's now telling you you've got an illness and it's hard for you, and you'll always slip up, and you'll always, there'll always be days when you're sad, and that's okay. Come here and give me a cuddle. That's actually that's a pretty safe place to be in, right? It's not pleasant. It's not where people would prefer to be consciously, but it's a pretty safe place. So in that moment, you've really got to work hard. You've really got to get uncomfortable and start to actively search out some of these positives, because they're not going to appear, merely because they're there. Like, I could have, in those dark times, I reckon I could have seen a story from a police officer who'd done 18 years in the police with a 12-year gambling addiction, that had depression. And I would have been able to say, but it's not the same police force as mine, so therefore it wouldn't have worked, right? Like, in that time, I was just that dead against anything was going to work. Conversely, I could find somebody that was a waitress, that only had a 3-year addiction to shopping, that's never suffered depression and is having a lifetime, the time of a life, and I could find something in that now that would actually help me through my journey.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. It's like when you're trying to start to get that self help and trying to make yourself better and getting uncomfortable with all of that, your subconscious almost goes like, "Hey, whoa, 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 hey, whoa, whoa, what are we doing? What are we doing? No, 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 don't do that, don't do
Yep.
that. No, get back in bed. Come on."
That, that's it. I mean, it's uncomfortable, and Joe Dispenza, one of the guys I follow, talks about when you make a small change, get ready. This shit's going to be uncomfortable, because if you've been on autopilot for a long time, I talk about, a plank of wood, and if you've got yourself a back saw, and you're sawing down that plank of wood, you've got yourself a nice little groove that, every time you come back tomorrow, you just chuck the saw straight into that groove and go again. Right? If you try and start 1 millimeter to the right or left of that groove, and you've got to go slow, you're going to slip back into it. It's a tough grind. You don't want to do that. Like, the groove next to it's just so easy to be in, right? And we don't want to start that next groove. So it's there's again, I found some comfort in the fact that there's a logical reason why it was difficult for me to change, why it was difficult for me to even recognize some of the honesty or the truth that was needed about where I was in the world, what I'd done in the past, what I actually had to do to move forward. And in some ways, that's the easy part. Then you've got to actually get out and start doing it. And almost everybody that I coach, the first thing I ask them to do is not hit snooze on their alarm for a week. And most of the people I work with at some form or another are snooze hitters. My view of it is that, you're basically telling yourself you don't want to start your day in favor of 9 minutes of crappy sleep. So, but the thing is that one simple task that seemingly shouldn't make a big difference, actually, you're probably 9 times out of 10 the people come and see me by Thursday and go, that's fucking hard. I don't know why I can't. And then I start talking to them about, I had a 12-year gambling addiction, right? You try and not hit snooze for a week and that's hard. Now stop something that you've been doing for 12 years, for 30 years, from when I started gambling, from, this stuff's going to take time and it's going to be uncomfortable. There's no two ways about it. I don't remember who I heard this from. It was a podcast I was listening to or watching, and they're talking about some days you've got to figure out what flavor of shit sandwich you want to eat. Right? it's gonna be a shit sandwich. You're either going to stay where you are, and that's terrible, and nobody should, or you're going to have to get uncomfortable. Right? Either way, it's a shit sandwich, but you get to decide which flavor you want. You want the flavor of regret and not having moved from where you are, and constantly being, exhausted and tired and depressed and down and fucking life up and all that sort of stuff. You want that shit sandwich? Or do you want the shit sandwich of just being uncomfortable for a little while until you create a new groove, in your system,
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to eat it, but you're going to have one way or the other.
One has just a little more seasoning.
Yeah, that's exactly right. One's going to lead you to, you eat one, you're eating shit sandwiches for the rest of your life. You eat the other shit sandwich, towards you being a bit uncomfortable and towards growth, then eventually you're going to eat caviar, or lobster or whatever it is that people like.
Yeah, exactly. I think for me anyway, and I'm sure you can relate to this, when I was stripping down the layers and the ego and the excuses, I think the hardest part for me and the most uncomfortable part for me was looking back, as opposed to looking at the work I had to do. It was kind of looking back and going, man, I did that for so long, and just getting discouraged of the fact that, for years you were kind of in this fog.
Yeah, it's interesting, that I think what a lot of people get stuck on too is even if the past is not pleasant, is negative, is the things that you would have chosen to do differently. You've got to remember, if you've been doing something for 20 years and you decide to change, you're all of a sudden telling yourself that everything you've done for the last 20 years has been wrong. Now, nobody likes to hear that they're wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of whether it's a shitty gambling addiction or the wrong job or getting out of a relationship. Nobody likes to hear that they're wrong, right? So the first, one of the first things you've got to come to terms with is when you're looking back or when you're about to change, you're going to have to accept that, and not that it was wrong, but that it was a learning experience, right? That you've got something that you can grab onto, something positive out of the experience that you can learn. Maybe it's just that you don't want to do it that way next time. But we all struggle. It's why we struggle with leaving jobs. It's why we struggle with leaving relationships. A lot of people go for years in unhappy relationships because they can't bring themselves to say they were wrong. And now they might not have been wrong at the time, but they're probably wrong the longer and longer that they stay in it. Another thing too, that especially with gambling or Alcoholics Anonymous or any of those organizations or those pathways, and I'm a big advocate for a lot of those pathways. I didn't do Gamblers Anonymous, but I did something similar, and in line with a whole lot of other things. I think you've got to be multidimensional in how you attack some of these problems. But one of the biggest dramas I have with some of those programs I actually couldn't tell you how many days it's been since I've had a bet. I can tell you the day that I I regained control of gambling in my life. I can tell you the date, um, but I don't know how many days it's been because it's irrelevant to me. If I focus on how many days it's been or how bad that past was, and if I'm always focused in the past, how on earth am I going to get anywhere in the future? I talk about the two questions, how the fuck did I get here and how the fuck do I get out? Um, I do 95% of my coaching in the future. I don't, we do have to acknowledge our past, and we also have to accept our present. A lot of the times we can't make any moves forward because we won't even accept that we're in a hole, or we won't even accept where we are. So I do some work on that, but I'm not a therapist. We've got there's a therapy culture that, well, you could spend years and years on your past. And if I spend another 3 years trying to go through my past, in 3 years' time, I'm nowhere further ahead than where I am now. Now, is it important to know some of the past? Probably. But I also know that over the course of a number of years, 50% or thereabouts, this has been shown in studies, 50% of our memories aren't even real. So if I'm trying to figure out a reason why I've got some degenerate gambling problem and depression, there's a very good chance, there's at least a 50-50 chance, that the result that I come up with is going to be fake anyway, or false, or at least have some element of nuance to it that isn't exactly true. And at the end of the day, even when I figure that out, I've still got to get to the next part. How the fuck do I get out of here? Right? It's all well and good that you learn that it's because you weren't treated right as a kid, or because you fell over and scuffed your knee and no one gave you a cuddle. But at the end of the day, you've still got to do something today that moves you forward. And understanding. I've done research into myself and tried to figure out bits and pieces of pasts. And as I've explained to a lot of people, my nan died on the 1st of April. It's coming up in 2007, and that was devastating to me. I was very close to her. In fact, my brutal honesty moment was done at her graveside, at her where she's cremated. Speaking about her still gets me quite emotional, right? So when I talk to a psychologist on a particular day, he will tell me, well, your depression all started around that time and your gambling started after that. So there's a link there. Oh, that's fantastic. But 5 years later, I was going through a messy relationship breakup. And not long after that, I was integrating into a new family. I had a new partner and she had kids. And so, it was very tumultuous time, and it was very unnerving, and there's a lot of anxiety. Well, then maybe that was the reason why it got worse at that particular time. And then I worked jobs where I think for a particular period of 6 months, 4 days was the longest I was ever at home. The first year that the commissioner was in office, we did 54 trips out of Canberra. I was working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. I was on call 24 hours a day. Maybe that's the reason why I ended up where I ended up. At the end of the day, it don't really matter. I still ended up where I ended up. And the only thing that really did matter was what I was about to do next. So, back to your point of looking back, it's something we all do because we want to find a reason why I'm not fucked up, right? Like it's not me, right? I'm not the problem. There's got to have been a problem somewhere in my past that that has led me to where I'm going, where I got to. The problem with anything else being at fault is you can't fix it, right? It doesn't matter that I worked 60, 70, 80-hour weeks, or I traveled a lot, that my boss should have recognized that I was burnt out when I asked for help and we got told there's no budget for it, right? That's all good. Those things might be true, but I can't fix any of those because they're on him, or they're on your ex-partner, or they're on whoever it is that you're trying to blame for things. That's on them. Their acts are on them. If you can somehow find your part in all of that, your blame, you can fix that. I can fix me. I can't fix my ex-partner. I can't fix the commissioner. I can't fix the prime minister. I can't fix my job. I can't fix the money. I can work harder, but those things are all external. I can only fix me. So focusing on a past that's going to throw up some excuse why I'm broken isn't going to help me anyway. So personally, I just don't see the point. And I found my own success without having to do it.
Hmm. Well, I feel like to get to where you are, it's more of a melting pot than one specific thing
Hmm.
of your entire life. And I was talking to a life coach near the beginning of this season. Her name's Erin Mack. She was talking about how she doesn't really, with her clients, she doesn't talk about, she asks for their story, like their history before, and then goes, that's the last time you're going to talk about it. Because what a lot of us do is we relive that constantly. And like you said, 50% of the memory is either false or refabricated to like how we remember it. So trying to, or just continuing to live in that is just, it's torture almost. Like I went to 7 different therapists before I found the right one. I had to retell my story of why I thought I was fucked up. I had to retell it 7 times. And every time I felt worse than the next time. And then I had to get a new one and I would tell it again. And it's not, it's counterproductive almost in a way.
Yeah, 100%. Look, I heard most of that interview with Aaron, and it was good. I like that point. I mean, I really think it's it's a valuable lesson to learn. I mean, there's value in researching the past. I've been to psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists, counselors. There is a very valuable place for them in this process. There's no doubt about that. But ultimately, my job now, and even my job when I was going through this for me personally, wasn't about how something got to be broken. It was about how on earth it was going to get fixed. And I think, we do spend too much time trying to focus on how it went wrong. Also, on the reasons why it went wrong, rather than the how to fix it part. It's a very big industry, I suppose. There might be some financial reasons why people choose to do it, but it's not that helpful. And as you said, I think you probably find that the 7 times that you told the story, it probably got different each of the 7 times, depending on how you feel in the moment. If you went into the psychologist feeling positive and feeling, like there was going to be something coming out of it, or you've had a good day beforehand, the story changes depending on your emotions. And we know that. I mean, that's true. We've seen that in numerous studies, that the way we feel, our emotions will affect our thoughts. Your thoughts are going to affect what you say, and therefore, depending on the day that you go in, the story could be completely different. It has different nuances. It means different things, and it's relevant, but not as relevant as what do you do now? What do you do? Right? Fine, you're here. It's you. For me, I was $2 million. Lost $2 million. I lost my job. I was just about to lose my family, and I was seriously considering whether or not life was worth living. It's fantastic. I could spend a year trying to figure out why, or I could actually do something that was going to start moving me forward. The facts didn't change. The facts were still the same. I'd still lost $2 million, my job, my family, and all that sort of stuff. Facts don't change, and as Ben Shapiro says, facts don't care about feelings, right? They just exist. So they exist. Now what?
Yeah. Another problem a lot of people, actually I think most people, what they do is when they're looking back and they're trying to justify what happened in their life, they look for a logical reasoning behind it, and that's almost hurtful in a way. And what I mean by that is like when families go through a divorce, kids always go, "Oh, it's my fault." And
Mm.
even if it makes 0 sense, like I did it, and even if it
Yep.
makes 0 sense, they do it because as a kid, you don't know any other reason why your parents would split up. You just find that that's the most logical thing you can think of. You're like, oh, it's me. And
Mhm.
that's so hurtful. So it's sometimes trying to find the logical reasoning behind why things happened in your past, as opposed to focusing on what we can do to move forward, is way more hurtful than helpful.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, perhaps some of us need to refine that kid that blames themselves for everything. It's definitely wrong at the time, it certainly wasn't the child's fault that parents got divorced, but maybe we've learnt the opposite lesson, and as adults, we try and find every single reason why it's not our fault when we grow up. But at the end of the day, every single person is where they are because of the decisions and the actions that they've taken. It's again, there's people in my life that have mentioned about how tough working conditions were. They weren't tough, but tough in terms of amount of hours, times away from family, amount of stress and all that sort of stuff. That's true, except 18 and a half years earlier, I joined the federal police. But I made a decision to join. I took that action. I could have left at any time. Now, as difficult as it is sometimes, because you like the money, you like the job, you like the role, I still made a choice to stay. If somebody's got the cranks with their ex because their ex has done something wrong to them, or cheated on them multiple times, or did something something against them, well, guess what? At some stage in that relationship, you decided to be with that person. Now, you may have misread the tea leaves and they weren't as nice a person as you thought. You may have stayed longer than you should have. You may have given them some grace that they didn't deserve. But at some stage, you made a decision to stay in a relationship. It's not the other person's fault. We only ever get let down by our own expectations. We can't get let down by somebody else. Not our expectations aren't always invalid. If you're in a relationship and you expect your partner will be faithful, that's not an invalid expectation. But if you come home and find your partner in bed with somebody else, you're only upset because you expected them not to be. You're not actually upset at the act that they're going through. Mm-hmm. You expected them to be faithful, and you're upset at the broken expectation, not at the act. If you expected them to cheat on you, or it was no problem, then you're not upset, right? So sometimes we have to try and look for ways that we are at fault, even when conceptually it's very, very difficult to find one, because again, like I said, if I'm at fault, I can fix it, right? If you're at fault in my hurt, I can't fix that. I can't fix your role in my hurt. I can only fix me.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great point about the whole relationship thing. I think what a lot of people do is they fall in love with the idea that someone's going to conform to how they want them to. And then when they don't, they're like, oh, maybe I don't like you then.
Yeah, look, I'm certainly not a relationship coach, although a lot of my coaching ends up, has an element of it, because, guys that aren't happy typically have dramas in their relationship, known or unknown. The problem that I see in most of the relationships isn't the expectations. It's the expectations aren't shared. They haven't, as in, not that they're not common between the two, that they don't actually share their expectations with their partner, right? And you'll see this. One of the probably the most stark ones is when one person wants to have a child and one doesn't, and they don't figure it out for 5 years. It's like, well, this is something that you could have discussed 5 years ago. It's something that not many people do, because we fear being judged for our expectations. Now, if I said to my partner, I don't espouse to this view, but if I said to my partner, I would like a wife who stays home all day, looks after the kids, has my dinner on the table at 5 o'clock when I get home, does the cleaning in the house. That is what I expect of a partner. And she says, well, what I expect of a partner is X, Y, and Z. Maybe we could come to some sort of common ground, but at least we both know what the expectations are. Or she says, you know what, that's not who I want to be as a person. So therefore, we make the choice that we don't have that relationship. People are more worried about not having the relationship or being judged by the other person, instead of being honest and saying, you know what, I think men should take the bins out and mow the lawns, and I think women should, do the dishes. I don't think that, but that's what people are avoiding. They avoid that conversation at the start. They avoid setting up the ground rules and the boundaries. And 5 years later down the track, they start arguing about who puts the bins out. Like it's when you tell me, when you start arguing about who's putting the bins out, you're not fighting about who puts the bins out. There's something far deeper at play there.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to the whole we don't want to get uncomfortable thing. Setting those boundaries is uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's right. again, and the uncomfortableness there is being vulnerable. I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't want to tell somebody that this is my view, because if it's not their view, I'm going to be judged, and I don't want to be judged for it. And it's a difficult part about. It was a difficult part about my life early on. Perhaps I was fortunate at the time. I didn't feel fortunate, but I ended up, on, I don't know what page of the paper, because I only saw it online, but I ended up in the national newspaper, and on our national TV. Very short. I don't think I didn't take up a lot of airspace, but to me it was massive. And but it removed a lot of my vulnerability. There was no point in me hiding it anymore. It was in the bloody news. So I got to sit down with people and share my story. And over time, it actually became a strength that being vulnerable and being open often gives other people permission to be vulnerable. It makes us all feel like we've got something in common. But being vulnerable is one of the most difficult things for people to do, because we do fear that judgment. We fear being kicked out of the community. We feel being ostracized. We fear that for good reason. There's a good anthropological reasons why we need to be part of a community. And we fear being kicked out because of our views, and so we don't put our vulnerabilities on the line, and ultimately we move further and further away from who we are as a person. We get more and more depressed. We start acting out, and if you're in a relationship, you start doing things that make your partner break up with you. You start, for me, maybe I was doing things that made my job, cancel my employment. Right? It's because you're just not capable of being vulnerable in public.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we all have to get a little more vulnerable.
It would be very helpful. Very hard, but there's almost not one person I've met that's become vulnerable that hasn't valued it in the end for what it's brought them. There's untold peace on the other end of vulnerability, when you're no longer fearful of other people's judgment, or no longer fearful in the extreme of other people's judgment. It's a very peaceful place to live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a beautiful feeling, man.
Yeah.
Because like gambling is still a very serious addiction.
Mhm.
Now, do you ever get do you still get like cravings or like desires to go gambling? And if you do, like how do you stop them now?
Yeah, look, they're very few and far between, the urges. Look, I again, I feel fortunate in a way that going through that brutal honesty moment, a little anecdotal story that my father works at the races, and he was having his last day at the horse races in Sydney, before they were moving, and um, I went and seen my nan, and I had the brutal honesty session, and I think it was either his last day or it was pretty close to his last day, and they were around the corner from the races were around the corner from their house, so I went around to see him, and I walked through the races. I walked past all the bookmakers. I saw the horses. I went down to the jockey's room where he was. I saw all the jockeys, and I didn't even have one thought to have put a bet on. Like it seems to me like it's inconceivable that would even be the case. Now that doesn't mean that I've never had urges since, and certainly I don't know what it's like in Canada, but every second ad on the TV down here seems to be a gambling ad. They're not allowed to advertise cigarettes anymore, so it looks like gambling's taken that place. And every now and then I sort of think to myself, I could duck out and have a bet, or we get a big race on. And most of my betting issues were with racing, horse racing, harness racing, greyhound racing. I wasn't really into slot machines, poker machines, or casinos. I would go, but that wasn't as big an issue for me. So the urge does pop up, if it's even called an urge. A thought would pop up. Early days, I would probably say that my coping mechanism was saying that I told my nan I wouldn't, so I won't. The other thing I found very powerful was changing the point of the question. So often in the past, or when I was struggling with it, I would ask, what would happen if I had a bet? Or if I felt like having a bet, what would happen if I had a bet? And I'd just say, well, this urge would go away. I've been good for a week or a month. It's not, I deserve a bet. I've saved up some money, so I've got a little bit extra. And I would start to find reasons or excuses to reinforce my belief that, to answer the question, what would happen if I did have a bet? What I changed that question to is what would happen if I didn't have a bet? Now it's the same question ultimately, but you just changed the point of it. And like I was mentioning before, your brain will go in search of the answer to the question that you want, right? If you ask the right question, you can go searching for that answer. So, and I would start saying things like, well, you've gone a week, so you don't, if you don't have to go back to day one or day zero. You've saved $1,000. If you waste it, you won't have any more money. You won't be able to say that you've stopped gambling. You won't be able to say that gambling no longer has control over you. All of a sudden, you start saying to yourself, "Oh, hang on, why would I have a bet now? This is crazy, right? This is a silly thing." So just changing that point of that question. Now, I have had, I've definitely had a bet since that day, but I couldn't tell you when it was, and it was like a small bet, one bet, and that was it. Like nothing. It was a non-issue. But in terms of having that urge to go, that probably has gone. But I think that's gone because as I coach what I call a 2-track hack. I put some stuff in place that stopped the immediate action of gambling, but then I went and did the deep state strategy, like worked on the underlying factors, started to understand who I was as a person, and and really took away, ultimately the gambling was a very end product for me. And it was on the end of the ego was first. I couldn't acknowledge that I had any issues. My issue wasn't gambling. I just had any issues, whether it was I was sad, or I was feeling vulnerable, or, anything like that. So my ego got in the way first. That led to my depression, which I label the excuse. And then eventually I went to the escape, which was my gambling. Attacking the ego part and actually getting rid of those masks mean that even if the thought comes up, it'd be impossible to not have the thought. The amount of ads that are on TV here, it'd be ridiculous. But the mere fact that I addressed the underlying problem means that it is just that. It's a thought. It's just the same thought as, like, I see someone smoking a cigarette and I go, oh, I wonder what a cigarette tastes like. Or plenty of other things in my life that I have no desire to do that might just pop into your head and go, I wonder what sushi would taste like. I don't like sushi, right? So, be something like that. It really doesn't have the same effect that I know it did in the past. The other, 4 or 5 times I quit gambling, it was a battle every single day, and it was a battle because I didn't do the deep work on the on the ego and the stuff that was sending me there.
Mm-hmm. That's great, man, because like for people who are listening who might be in a similar situation with anything addiction related, they can look at you and like realize, like, oh, he came from this, like he got let go from his job of 18 years. He was almost $2 million in debt. And yet now that addiction that basically controlled his mind for a while is just a passing thought. So it kind of,
Yeah,
it's a hopeful outlook.
yeah, it's hopeful, and look, I think it's more than hopeful if you're prepared to be uncomfortable enough. But most of the programs that exist that I can, from what I can tell, the ones that I've been through and the ones that I've read about, still only address the problem they see in the mirror. Gambling addiction services still only try and create, unless you go to some deep work, and I've not been into a rehab facility, so I don't know what goes on inside the facilities. But most gambling, alcohol, drug processes still focus very heavily on stopping the symptom, stopping the gambling, stopping the drinking, stopping the drugs, stopping the whatever the addiction might be, even stopping the depression. So, if you get help for depression, they always focus on, they might give you some drugs to stop depression, or they might give you something to stop depression. Quite often there's something that's pushing you towards that as well. And it's I can say from experience, it's a fucking battle. When all you do is just try and fight something with willpower, or delete the apps, or move house so that you're not next to the pub or next to the dealer, or whatever the case may be. It's still a battle, because the issues that pushed you there still exist. So every day you're waking up going, don't gamble today, don't gamble today, don't gamble today. How many days has it been? Oh shit, it's only been 7 days since. When's this going to end? This is the main reason why I think most people would relapse, and why I relapsed was because it was just a battle. That's not a battle you can win every day. You can't win that battle every day. I won it for 6 months, but I can't win it for 6 months and 1 day. Or, and then you fall back in the heap. Like, well, what's the point? I can't solve this. And nobody wants to fight every day, right? That shit's exhausting. Nobody wants to battle every day to try and find some skerrick of happiness. It's far better, for me, far better to do the hard work, the uncomfortableness up front. Start crying, shed tears, be curled up in the corner in a ball like you don't know what's happening, because you've had to admit some shit to yourself that you really didn't want to admit. That shit's real, and it's hard, but it's the way that I got through to this point where, as I said, I still had debt after I had the realization, right? It's not, the debt didn't just go away. I still didn't have a job really. I still lost my partner. But that stuff didn't feel the same way as it did when I was battling every single day.
Mm-hmm. You have to indulge on that shit sandwich. You got to go to town
That's
on
it. Yeah. You have to learn to love it, and there's plenty of people that do it in different walks of life. Guys like David Goggins and that sort of stuff. These guys are actively looking for the shit sandwich, and they love it. You learn to love the shit sandwich if you can love the shit in your life, right? Life's going to be very good. If the worst stuff in your life you actually can enjoy, how good's the good stuff in your life going to be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That David Goggin guy, that's a character, man. Holy.
When I grow up, I want to be David Goggins.
yeah, me too. That would take a little more work than I'm doing, but
yeah. Look, again, on some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, David Goggins was probably the second or third interview I remember watching after my turning point. And again, his story is not my story, right? He doesn't have a gambling problem, but I don't believe there's too many differences in most people's underlying problems, right? What led him to become 300 pounds and sitting on the couch and spraying for cockroaches was the same thing that led me to gambling $2 million and abusing a corporate credit card and being depressed, right? It's the same thing underneath, that we're just bullshitting ourselves and lying to ourselves about who we are. He changed when he started looking himself in the mirror and being honest with himself about who he was. And I'm paraphrasing, but that he was, fat and lazy and all that sort of stuff. I looked at that and I went, I could learn from that. That's something that I could do. I don't have to tell myself I'm fat and lazy, but I certainly had a gambling problem and couldn't get out of my own way. And I needed to address that, right? And so, yeah, I do follow his stuff, but I follow it from my point of view, not to run hundreds of miles or be the freak athlete that he is, but to overcome the stuff that I need to overcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're a lot more similar than we give ourselves credit for, or that we 100%. Think. Yeah. So your book, Externally Bulletproof, where can people find it?
It's not out just yet, so hang with me for another couple of months. We're getting towards the end process. So I'm looking at hopefully a month or two. I didn't realize that editing and publishing was a longer process than writing in some sense, although it did take me 4 years to write a book in about 4 weeks or 2 months. There's a lot of writing that went on in early times, but externally bulletproof, internally brittle. It's a little play on words. I mean, my job for a lot of years was as a close protection officer for the Prime Minister. So the bulletproof part came in there, but it's also a truism for who I was as a person, that on the outside I was this alpha male chest beating guy that was a problem solver for everybody. And, there was nothing that you could do to take me down. But inside, shit was crumbling. And I wasn't able to deal with that. And that led me to, the depths that I'd gotten to. So probably the best thing for people to do is if they want some info about it or see some of the stuff we're doing is on Facebook, Strong Mend, MEND. So mend as in fixing. So Strong Mend. There'll be more stuff coming out about the book as we get closer to that being published, but we still put a lot of stuff out on there. I'm not great with social media, but it's relatively regular. And it's me, and as like this interview, a lot of it's not prepared. It's real and raw, and I go by the hashtag Be Brutal. It's all about the brutal honesty and that facts not having feelings element. That it's only when we can get to that point that we're going to start coming out the other side. So yeah, if people want to jump on there, they'll probably find a bit more detail about it.
Perfect, man. I'll put that link down below. Gary, this was a lot of fun, man. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Cheers, Harry. And look, congratulations on the work that you're doing too, mate. It's very important that more messages and word gets out there, especially from young men. I won't say that I'm old, but I'm 44 and I've lived a life, and I've only come to this point because of some very public battles. I'm thankful that I've come to this point and hopeful that I might have got here eventually anyway. But some of the stuff that you're doing, in this space as a young fella and, being active and getting some of the people on that you have, mate, congratulations and job well done.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. Thank you. And to all my viewers, I will see you guys next time. Hey guys, thanks for watching another episode of my show. If you want more episodes of the H Panel, the button's going to be right here. If you want to subscribe for more videos from myself, it'll be right down below. Please like, comment, share, give 5 stars. Let's keep this conversation going, guys, all right? I'll see you next time. Thank you for your support.